Nigeria's unemployment rate rose slightly to 4.2% in the second quarter of 2023 from 4.1% in the previous quarter, the latest Nigeria Labour Force survey has shown. Africa's biggest economy, with more than 200 million people, had an all-time high unemployment rate of 33.3% in the fourth quarter of 2020, but it fell to 4.1% in the first quarter of 2023 from 5.3% in the fourth quarter of 2022, following the new methodology adopted by the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS. Analysts point to a combination of factors that could be contributing to the rise in a jobless population in Nigeria, and we will consider those factors in this discourse and what must be done to reduce the figures. I'm now joined by Dr. Muda Yusuf. He is the Chief Executive Officer, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, CPPE. Thank you, Doctor, for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so when Okay, great. Thank you. Now, when Q1 2023 unemployment rate was released based on this new methodology, some analysts actually faulted it, and they were arguing that it could lead to an underestimation of the true level of unemployment in Nigeria. And I haven't gotten to, speak with you on this since then. So I might as well begin by asking what your thoughts are about the new methodology.
Well, I have my very strong reservations about the new methodology. Because to a large extent, it doesn't reflect the reality as we can all feel it. Even from just, cursory look at the environment, a cursory look at even our immediate environment as individuals, as families, we know how serious the unemployment situation is. So when we say that the unemployment figure is around 4%, 4.1%, for me, it's a gross underestimation of what the reality is. But of course, the NBS has argued as well. This is a new methodology that they are using, and they talk about, if you work for a few hours in a week, you are regarded as employed, and so on and so forth. Well, academically or technically, we can concede to that. But when we talk about unemployment in Nigeria, I think we are looking beyond just as people working for a few hours in a week. I regard them as employed, because the whole essence of employment is to make a living. How many work can you do? What kind of employment can you engage in that you work for a few hours in a week and that will sustain you? It's very rare unless you are a super professional or you have some super expertise that you can work for a few hours and make so much money. Otherwise, we need to, adjust or modify the methodology to reflect our own peculiar conditions. That methodology may work elsewhere, but I don't think it reflects the reality of what the situation is in our own environment. So I have a lot of concerns about the methodology.
Okay. All right, I like what you said about the methodology, and there are those who are saying that, even if you want to stick to this methodology or you want to stick with this methodology, how about we have it with the other one side by side so we can actually make comparison and know what we are getting into, whether we're getting better or not. But let's break this down a little. Now, if within the past 7 days I was able to shine about 20 shoes in an hour and I was paid maybe 1,500 naira, based on this new methodology, does it mean that I am employed?
Certainly, because that does not mean that you are employed.
But based on this new methodology,
maybe you can talk of, because they also talk of underemployment. Perhaps you can say that you are underemployed. But the basic thing is that the whole essence of employment is for you to be able to make a minimum level of living. At least your very basic things. If you can cover that from your earnings, then we can reasonably say that you are employed. But if you are engaged in a vocation or a job where you get some rewards, and whatever you earn from that engagement cannot last more than 1 or 2 days, that cannot be reasonably regarded as being employed. So just as we said, we need to, maybe we can have a dual approach or a dual metrics. You have a metric that is used by ILO and some of these international agencies, which the NBS seems to be saying. Then we can have another approach that reflects our own reality. Because the whole essence of being employed is for you to be able to take care of your immediate needs as a person and maybe even for your family. If that is not happening, then it will be an illusion to be saying that we have so little unemployment.
All right. Well, the new methodology actually recognizes me as employed if I have worked for at least an hour in the past 7 days. Of course, your other metrics about whether I'm underpaid or I'm underworking, all of that can also be priced into it. So if working for only about an hour in 7 days qualifies me as employed, how then should we interpret the Q2 data, which puts the unemployment rate at 4.2%? And with that, we see a 0.1% increase from the Q1 figure, which was 4.1%. So looking at all of this, trying to understand, laying the background for this conversation now, how then do we react to these new figure?
Well, the way to react to it is to say that based on this methodology, the methodology is maybe a global methodology. But one thing we normally say about some of this methodology or metrics is that what is applicable in one jurisdiction may not be applicable in another jurisdiction. In order to provide guidance for policymakers, and in order not to also mislead policymakers, it is often good to have a metric or a methodology that is fit for purpose, a methodology that aligns with your own reality. So you can concede to NBS, yes, based on your methodology, 4.1, but we can also argue that working for 1 hour or 2 hours, you earn maybe 1,000 naira. 1,000 naira cannot sustain you for even 2 days in a week, not to talk of a month. So we cannot reasonably say that in our own circumstances, that is being employed. That you have been employed. Look at where we are coming from. Before now, we are talking about unemployment of about 30, 33% and so on. So when this new methodology was introduced, the thing crashed to about 4%. And just look around you. Look around you and see how many people are really struggling to look for jobs. Of course, there are a lot of cases, just as I said, about underemployment, people who are doing work that even their qualifications are much more superior to, people who are engaged just marginally, people who are not engaged optimally, but who are just, getting 1 or 2 things to do. If a lot of that is happening, people are hustling to do a lot of things, especially in the informal sector space, but that cannot stand as claiming that the person is employed. So as much as possible, we'll appeal to NBS. We should have 2 methodologies. One that is in line with this ILO methodology, the other that reflects the peculiarities of our own condition, so that the policymakers can be properly guided. Because if you are telling the policymakers that our unemployment is just 4% or 4.1%, they can as well go to sleep, that we don't have a problem as far as unemployment is concerned. But we know what the reality is. So we need a metric that will reflect the reality. I think that is a summary of it.
All right, off the top of your head now, I just want to ask you, if you were to look at the methodology we were using before now, if we were to, compute all of this based on that, what do you think the figure will look like?
It cannot be less than 30%. Look at what has happened to many businesses, especially in the last couple of months. Look at how many businesses have folded up because of the harsh economic situation. The macroeconomic headwinds, the naira depreciation, the high inflation, weak purchasing power, and all those things. Those things have affected a lot of businesses, especially SMEs. I know when you are talking about employment, the SMEs are the largest employers of labor, the one that creates most of the jobs. by NBS own account, I think we have close to 40 million MSMEs. Although majority of them are nano enterprises, but how many of them are surviving as we speak? So given what the economic condition has been over the last couple of months, the number of businesses that normally should be employing people, the number has reduced because of the prevailing economic conditions, because of the cost of production, because of the exchange rate, because of the energy cost, and so on and so forth. And of course, we have stories about, companies that have closed down, some that have left the country, and so on and so forth. So the general economic environment, and to some extent, even the security environment, has created a lot more challenges as far as unemployment is concerned. So if you take all that into account, you'll be talking of unemployment in real terms of close to 30% or even more. That is if you define employment as engaging in an activity that can allow you at least to meet your basic needs. Basic. I'm talking about food, I'm talking about transportation from.
I like that you made reference to the reforms embarked on by this particular administration. And we see how that these reforms, although intended to make things better, to make, the macroeconomic environment better, we have seen that it's taken a toll on businesses, corporates, individuals. And you've also mentioned how that even some businesses are beginning to close shop. Talk about, businesses leaving Nigeria, both the small, the big, and all of that. So looking at, all of this now, how do we then strike a balance between, policies, reforms, and also ensuring that, at the end of the day, the real sector does not suffer? How do we strike a balance here?
Well, if I heard you well, because there's been a bit of audio issues, I think you are talking about what we can do going forward.
Okay, yes, I was actually asking, can I come in here, please?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So I was saying, you talked about the reforms that were undertaken by this administration and how that has impacted a lot of businesses. How we're saying, whether it is the fuel subsidy removal taking its toll on prices of goods and services, or it is the exchange rate also taking its toll on inflation and all of that pricing into so many things. Businesses folding up on all of that. I mean, to a very large extent, People will say that these reforms are good in themselves. But at what point do we begin to probably try to strike a balance between these reforms and then the impact on the people?
Well, the reforms are necessary. The reforms are inevitable. But my take is that there will be short-term pains, which is what we are going through now. Maybe in a couple of months, first quarter, second quarter, we begin to see some of the dividends or the rewards of the reforms. But the reforms were necessary to pull the economy back from the brink. Because if the reforms are not taking place, the situation will probably have been much worse than what it is now. Yes, the pains are enormous, and I think that the government is taking steps to mitigate the pains. Of course, the government can do more, to address the social challenges. But of course, steps have been taken. First, for instance, on the part of the CBN and the exchange rate, the CBN has taken quite some steps to clear some of the foreign exchange backlog. And going forward, when significant progress is made around the foreign exchange backlog, the arrears and all of that, the CBN will be in a much better position to be able to support the foreign exchange market. Because clearing the backlog is a major priority, and we are talking about close to $7 to $10 billion. I mean, that's a lot of money. So once we cross that hurdle, then it will become easier, to begin to now stabilize the exchange rates. And on the side of the energy cost, which is another major shock on the citizens and on businesses, we are beginning to see indications that we'll now begin to see an improvement in the domestic refining of petroleum products, both from the private sector refiners and from the public, from the NNPC refineries. We're able to also double down on that, ensure that we support all those systems to ensure domestic production of petroleum products. That will help to at least reduce gradually, the pressure of energy prices, and that will also reduce the pressure of fuel importation on the foreign exchange market. So both from the foreign exchange perspective and from the domestic fuel supplies perspective, we expect to see some significant benefits from that. Then thirdly, we are beginning to also see some improvements in the fiscal environment, what we call the fiscal space. I'm referring to the gradual improvement in government revenue as a result of the reforms. We have seen some improvement in revenue arising from the foreign exchange convergence. We have seen an improvement in revenue arising from the fuel subsidy removal. So that is feeding, of course, into the FAC allocation, is feeding into government's revenue, is feeding also into the likely reduction in fiscal deficit. So it's likely to have some macroeconomic benefits. It's also putting the governments across all levels, local, state, and federal, in a much better position to be able to undertake some social intervention, in order to support the citizens. And in this season, we have seen a couple of states, giving some relief bonuses and things to their workers. So that is the outlook as far as I can see.
All right, interesting outlook right there. But then let's get back to this particular figure, the data that was released by NBS. Now, in terms of educational attainment, unemployment rate was 8.0% for those with post-secondary education. I'm sure you alluded to this earlier. Then 5.4% for those with upper secondary education, 3.7% for those with lower secondary education, 3.0% for those with primary education, and 2.5% for those with no formal education. I'd like you to help us unpack this. What does this say?
Well, what that is saying is that for those who don't have much education, they are less discriminatory, they are less choosy, and they can easily find their level. Because I remember, in many environments, even at the village level, once the parents see that either they cannot afford to pay the school fees, or they notice that their children or their child doesn't have that capacity, to advance academically, then they just choose from the one, they choose a kind of vocation. Now you go into auto engineering, or you go into electrical vocation, you go into bricklaying, building, construction, so many. And for our brothers and sisters in the East, they also give the option of going as an entrepreneur. There's this apprenticeship scheme that takes place, very popular, especially among our Eastern brothers. And that is why for many of them, they are doing very well in the area of trade and commerce. Because from a very early age, they're already into apprenticeship. By the time they are 20 or 25, they're already mature. They already understand the business. So for them, there is much more flexibility in terms of what they want to do.
Doctor, let me come in here.
That is why.
Let me come in here. Does it bother you that, having this sort of figure sort of tries to distort the real thing? Because at the end of the day, when you look at that figure, you would say, okay, maybe these people, the unemployment rate here is low, so we don't necessarily need some form of intervention in that area. Meanwhile, at the end of the day, it is actually because they are more flexible, they can take up, more menial jobs and all of that. Speak to these things, please.
No, well, generally, the methodology needs to be modified. It needs to be localized. It needs to be put in our own context so that we don't create a wrong impression for policymakers. And for all these other segments of the economy where you have all these informal people and all these people who are not very literate, we need to also be clear that we should not diminish the importance of education at all levels. no matter what any of our citizens want to do, even at an early age, we should encourage them to be educated. Because such education will add value to whatever they are doing, no matter the vocation. Whether it is fashion designing, whether it is trading, whether it is entertainment, whatever it is, education brings a lot of value into it. So as much as possible, as a matter of policy, we should encourage at least everybody should at least get to secondary level of education, compulsorily.
All right.
Because
in closing,
that will enhance their capacity in whatever they are doing.
All right. In closing now, beyond the methodology used and all of that, one thing is very clear, and that is that many Nigerians are either losing their jobs or they are sinking deeper into poverty. That's the poverty margin. So let's look at how this government can actually arrest this trend. How can this be addressed? How can this be taken care of? You've talked about education, which is very important. But beyond that, I'd like to hear other things you think can be done to address this.
Well, other things the government can do to address it is to create an environment for entrepreneurs to be able to create the jobs. Because generally, jobs are created by entrepreneurs. And in most climes, it is the small business that create a lot more jobs. So we should identify their pain points and see how we can improve on the condition. We have talked about issues around the macroeconomic environment, inflation, exchange rates, interest rates, and things like that. If we improve on that, more businesses will be able to do a lot more, and they'll be able to employ more people. I mean, if you have up to 30 million or so of SMEs, imagine that if each of them can even employ one person, I mean, that's a lot of jobs that are created. So we need to create the environment for entrepreneurs to be able to do well, including the issue of energy. Energy cost is a major cost. It's a major impediment to business. So creating the environment for SMEs to be able to thrive will have a major impact on the employment situation. Dealing with the issue of insecurity will have a major impact on employment, especially in the agricultural sector. When we talk about primary agriculture, most of them are small-scale farmers. So if you have insecurity, a lot of unemployment is created as a result of that. So if we deal with insecurity, that will also help a great deal. Then we need to begin to also look at our school curriculum so that we continue to train people, especially in our universities, in a manner that will align with the needs of the society. Because the needs of society, the needs of industry, the demands of society is changing by the day. The demands are evolving. So we need to be able to, develop skills, create that kind of curriculum that will give us graduates that can, align with the skills, with the demands of society, with the demands of industry. So that is also very important. So those are some of the things I think the government can do to address these issues.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Muda Yusuf, CEO, CPPE, for sharing your thoughts with us on Business Edge today.
Thank you.